Hello everyone. Welcome to the Microsoft webinar on Scrum and Agile Planning with Project PPM. My name is Tim Runcie today, and I will be your basically instructor slash tutor guide. We will have an educational session here with some live demos, and we definitely will be taking some questions. With me today, helping to field some of those questions, we have Cindy Lewis, who's also a project MVP, and I want to thank her for also attending. But welcome everyone. Our goal today really is to help introduce to you the opportunity to leverage project in a PPM fashion for project, program, and portfolio management, but also looking specifically about the ability with Scrum and Agile planning. So in many cases we see quite a few conversations around this, around different types of tools and techniques, and I'll be digging into that a little bit today as well. So for those that are just joining, again, welcome. My name is Tim Runcie, and one of the things, so let me tell you a little bit about myself as we get started. I am a 20-year veteran of using Project, probably more than 20 years now. Started back in 1990, well actually started in 1988 in the first DOS version, and began teaching and using it specifically in the Windows version for project and construction management. So work directly with, as an MVP, supporting the project engineering group, and I've been working across all different business sectors using project and different types of PPM technologies. So today I'm very pleased to talk about our topic and really maybe help educate you specifically around key functions and capabilities that you can build into project. I work for a company called AdvisorCon, and we're a project program and portfolio management company that specializes in teaching, consulting, and then helping people find how to blend technology to grow their project management culture. Written lots of books, and I'm sure some of you may have seen me present in other webinars, but I welcome everyone today, and I'm hoping that you'll get a chance to take a look at certainly Project 2013, if you haven't seen that, as well as Project Online. I wanted to kind of give a taste of both in terms of addressing our ability to work specifically in Scrum or Agile type of environments. So without much further ado, let's go ahead and dig in and talk about how to make this work for you guys and what we do. Before I do that, I want to give a big plug out to the Microsoft Project Conference. It's been a few years since we've had this, and so coming up actually on February 2nd through the 5th down in Anaheim, California, they're going to have the project conference, and there's quite a special series of events and speakers that are going to come in. It's kind of an all-star cast. Myself, some of my colleagues, even Cindy, will be speaking and presenting, but this, again, as I mentioned, hasn't been on for a couple years, so you're going to see a lot of good conversation around existing implementations of project, certainly strategy, even Agile. There'll be some other dimensions around being working specifically to present the integration of project with other systems. I'll talk a little bit about that because I know a lot of times as we get into development environments or agile iterations or things that may or may not sit inside of a waterfall environment, that this is a great watering hole to come, meet partners, colleagues, meet the engineering team, and take advantage of that. Also for you, as we go forward, there's basically a new discount coupon. So there is a 10% discount if you use the partner code, or actually the registration code for this event, called PCSSP10. And again, it'll be at the msprojectconference.com. This does expire January 15th, so if you have a chance to go out and find out if you can go, we'd love to see you there, and definitely take advantage of this discount offer. Very helpful, especially as we get going into registering and having quite a big turnout. Okay, I know a lot of you guys asked about Scrum and Agile and different types of methodology approaches, and so this conversation in our webinar today is really going to be designed to help maybe answer some of those as well as provide some good feedback. As a side note, we have the opportunity certainly to get in and take a look at, for those of you that attend, the ability to get PDUs for this. So I know sometimes people are asking. And then I will be showcasing a series of files, and I just wanted to let everyone know that if you are interested, I will be happy to send those files to you. I'd like people to really take a look at not only building their own Agile/Scrum environment and project, but sometimes it's helpful to have a prototype to work with. So we're going to talk about the methodologies, dealing specifically both Agile, Scrum, Waterfall, a few things like that. I don't want to spend a lot of time there. I want to spend my time in the tool. And of course, we'll talk about the technology with Project PPM. And PPM, again, Project Program and Portfolio Management. So it's not just localized to a desktop tool, but also thinking in terms of an enterprise approach. So we'll also think through some of the moving parts of Scrum and Agile, which will lead into the building. I'm actually going to show you different views. We'll also be getting into how I built them so that you guys can actually replicate this on your own and be able to leverage and use that. I'll also go into Project Online. In fact, I'm going to go to the online tenant that Microsoft has. I'm going to show you just how quick and easy that is as well as just kind of showcasing this. And then in between some of the buildings, I'm going to do some Q&A and do a recap for everyone. So our goal is to make sure we have a rich environment for us to work with. Now, I'm not a sucker, so I'm not going to put the PDUs up front, but if you stick around towards the end of the session, I will definitely bring up that slide and the registration login that you need to do to get those. So looking forward to good questions, and feel free to post those as we go through. Again, as I mentioned, we'll have some Q&A time as we go forward. So let's start first of all with understanding what we call the structured approaches in building schedules. So if you think in terms of project and its use as a tool, we hear people talking about demand planning, capacity planning, resource capability planning. You'll see a lot of different conversations. And then we see many times terms or conversations come up around different methodologies. So the term waterfall, or we can talk about the PMBOK approach, or Prince2, which, as you can look here on the screen, we talk about from a PMBOK approach. We have initiate, plan, execute, control, close out. Very common methodology certainly here in North America, Central and South America. Prince2 is certainly strong in Southern, basically in South America, Europe, and other areas. But again, looking at a phased life cycle where we have a series of start, plan, initiate the project, controlling stages. You might even hear terms where people talk about rational or rational unified process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But all these approaches are really designed to think through how we're dealing with demand. And that's going to be an important principle in looking at Agile or Scrum or waterfall planning, is really how do we deal with demand. Now, the last bullet item I have here is the GERD method. And people go, Tim, what is GERD? And that is simply what we find most everywhere is the get or done approach. So whether you're building schedules with a methodology, whether you're not building it with a methodology, in many cases people are mapping and tracking what we call the demand for work and work activities. Okay, so now digging a little bit deeper, why don't we use, say, waterfall all the time? Or if a methodology is so great, why don't we zero in and leverage, one silver bullet for different approaches? And so let's talk about that just for a minute. If we think in terms of kind of what we call a standard or a phased life cycle approach, really in an organization, in many cases, it becomes a little bit more formal. There's process involved in doing this. There's planning. There might be documentation that needs to be clearly put together. And as we leverage what we call Scrum and Agile, or in fact, if you think about Agile in general, Agile is more of an umbrella. There are many different types of Agile methodologies, and of course, Scrum is a very common one that we see today, and I'll be talking about that one specifically. But if we think of an Agile or a more iterative cyclical approach, we find that there are uses for this that actually help in terms of delivering value, managing task details, hence the demand, and even resource assignments directly. So in most cases, you can deal with complex to rapidly changing requirements, especially if you think about from a technology or an IT or a development platform. In many cases, we're not building a house. We're not engineering, a road. It's not something that we've done for 50, 60 years. It's not something that is standard, and there's 400-page, governance documents that go through that. In many cases, there's requirements that will unfold, and it's something that hasn't been done before. And so in today's day and age, we also run into a place where, with the economy kind of going up and down, depending on what industry in, that we have to do more with less. So we approach delivering value in a lean fashion. The idea is trying to deliver more with less in a shorter period of time versus maybe a more formal, structured approach of putting it together. Again, the idea from an Agile or a Scrum approach is we've got adaptive and real-time solutions. meaning that we're moving to a prototype. We're kind of showcasing value as quickly and as early on. And of course, there's fast iterations. The idea is that we're producing a product, a prototype, we're getting it in front of the customer. It may be that it's exactly what they described in a requirement, but when they see it, oh, that's really not going to work. So instead of waiting a long period of time to deliver something and then having it not meet the value of a stakeholder, the idea is that we have short iterations. We'll talk about sprints, where the idea is that you're producing something in a short period of time. Again, getting to higher quality, more work done, and then of course supersized accountability, meaning that you have high interaction. People know what's going on. There's no guesswork. There's nothing going on that says, hey, I have to wait 4 weeks before I actually can see something. And then in terms of firefighting, we get into a place where in many cases problems or issues will crop up, and the idea is that within a matrixed organization, instead of begging, borrowing, and stealing resources, you have kind of an iterative or a dedicated team. Now the big question is how do we translate some of this directly into project? So we think about some of the methodologies, and you'll see some terminology here where we talk about complex adaptive systems, meaning that we're tracking things that are complex, but yet it needs to have a highly adaptive or a highly iterative way of managing that. And so when people think about Microsoft Project, they're typing in rows, they're creating links and dependencies, they're establishing durations and deadlines, and perhaps kind of creating more of an architectural structure. And so you would think that this wouldn't work in terms of having a very agile or an iterative process in a scheduling technology. And I'm here to tell you that it is absolutely false. Whether you're doing extreme programming, lean development, rapid application development, joint rapid application development. The idea is to think clearly and simply about how we want to track the demand. Does everything need to live and breathe inside of Microsoft Project as a schedule perspective, or is it something that we can say, look, I've got the value from a planning, a work effort, and a deliverables perspective, but I don't necessarily need to have every 15 minutes a task written down. So I describe this in terms of managing an approach with project as if you're managing a handful of BBs, it's so much more difficult than managing a handful of pebbles. And if we think in terms of stakeholders, what we're looking at doing is trying to create the value-based environment that gives us the most bang for buck. So we see Scrum, in fact, this probably would just be a whole sea of text, but I've seen Scrum used successfully at just about every organization we work with. I've also seen Scrum used unsuccessfully at many different organizations. So it is important that we find a balance, and I'll talk about pitfalls and avoidance with project as we put that together. So whether it's large companies that are using this or certainly using it for in-house development, contract, fixed price, handheld mobile apps, basically this agile iterative process is something that can be leveraged in lots of places. Now, if everyone will take a quick look at my screen here, and I've got it at the very bottom, where it talks about construction. Let me see if I can do a quick zoom here. And I'm hoping everyone can see this. But people go, well, construction typically is more formal. But coming out of the construction industry, I will tell you that whether they do call it Scrum or if they have chickens or pigs or they don't ever describe that, is that in many cases, if we have a lot of iterative activities that we want to plan, manage, and track, if you look at a construction crew, first thing in the morning, they huddle around the burn barrel. What are you working on? What do you need help with? What do you need to do? And then they split up and go work on their tasks. So the value proposition of leveraging a Scrum or a more agile approach with project, again, will be back to that demand discussion that we were talking about. So as we get in and looking specifically at something called the Agile Manifesto, and I want to talk about this just briefly because I think this is important for us to be thinking about when we build schedules in project, what is the value of what level of detail do we need to track? So we talk at a high level, thinking through the Agile Manifesto here. The idea is that uncovering a better way to develop software, I would scratch software and say we're delivering a solution to a customer, is that the emphasis is on individuals and interactions over process and tools. We want to have a working solution, typically in software, versus comprehensive documentation. Again, high customer collaboration. I kind of chuckle around customer collaboration, because I've seen people will implement kind of a Scrum process, but they fail to involve the customer, and that is one of the secret ingredients, is that in many cases you want to have that show and tell, high interaction with your customer to make that work. And if that's something that we want to track and manage and deal with our presentations, we certainly would want to see that broken down in a schedule with resource assignments. But overall, the idea is that we're trying to necessarily create value, and value as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So you'll hear people talk about terms, and maybe you've been in an organization where somebody will come in with the next silver bullet methodology. And if you take a look at my screen here, let me just kind of zoom it. Hopefully you guys can see this. But you see two pilots, and they're flying merrily, turning around for a picture. And of course, if you look closely in the middle, smack dab in the center, is an oncoming plane. So I don't want us to miss the value of delivering good scheduling with project or project online in order to focus on the methodology. And so the idea is that there needs to be a balance. Everyone uses tools, and everyone does projects. They don't necessarily put those two together. And so our goal will be to ensure that you've got an opportunity to work with that. So a couple dangers in terms of an Agile approach. Again, think about reinventing the wheel. If we're going to build a good schedule template or something that we can work with, the idea is that we're in a position where we are able to see the value, and that we're not necessarily having to retype all the same pieces. In fact, you might have an organization where you do have some sort of a time boxing, where your senior executives are thinking through high-level roll-ups, but yet your development teams are working in an Agile environment. And so we want to ensure that we aren't losing sight of the prize. What is that timeline? What are our deadlines? We certainly want to put in the ability to have documentation, and if you're using Project Online, you can certainly use the balance of SharePoint to upload your documentation or task notes, but the idea is that there's always one central version of the truth, and people spend less and less time in the schedule and more time collaborating via the SharePoint workspace set up assigned to that project. And again, another value is that in many cases in an Agile approach, people forget to capture metrics. So we'll talk about story points, which you're going to see here in just a minute. And the idea is that we want to track some level of detail so that we can see how we're doing, how we can mature in the process, the product that we're working on. Now, I mentioned my background was in construction, and so I actually had a construction company which I worked across all over the U.S. Then I worked for the U.S. Navy as a CB, and we had a phrase that we called it there, which is, if we talk about benefits, we called it Semper Gumby. And if you've ever dealt with the Marine Corps, they talk about Semper Fidelis, which is always faithful. Well, Semper Gumby is always flexible. And so if we're going to do a good schedule and we want to present and provide that opportunity for us to manage and track details, but yet be flexible in terms of the level of detail, then this is going to be important for us to continue to build these in and have results-oriented focus. All right, enough of the lecture part. Let's dig into project. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to kind of go through a little bit of a tour. Let me allow this to show up, and then will somebody validate that we've got a good screen share going on here? Okay, excellent. So if you can see my screen, what I'm going to do is do a quick zoom test. I want to make sure if I need to zero in. Sometimes, depending on your monitor or what you see, it might be small. But I'm able to come in here and kind of zoom a little bit more in detail. Inherently, if we look at a project, and I'm just going to start with an Agile schedule or what we call a Scrum schedule and define some of the pieces that we're going through, it's really important to understand what are the elements that make a good, successful project schedule dealing with more of an Agile or a Sprint or a Scrum approach here. So what I've done is I've kind of narrowed a list of tasks, and I've got a schedule in place for us to take a peek at. So as I review some of that information, the idea is that, in fact, let me just zoom here before I start typing, is that we're in a position where we're organizing in a series of sprints. So the idea certainly from a Scrum perspective is that you have short working huddles. If you think about the terminology of Scrum coming from rugby, where a group of guys or gals get together and they push really hard a short period of time to try and move the ball forward, a sprint is designed for us to have a series of activities that we need to accomplish. And as we begin to look at the value of what we're trying to accomplish there, we'll define that based upon customer need. So in many cases, remember the whole idea of an agile process is that we're looking to have good value, showcasing early on what is that priority. And you really do need to have your customers setting that. So in many cases, we call it the product owner, where they'll come in and define, hey, this is a high priority. And that feature or feature set, or some people call it a user story, is defined, and we're clearly trying to figure out what we need to do and when we can get that done. So a core ingredient is thinking in terms of how to organize a series of iterations. And you can see what I've done here is I've basically took an Agile component. I created a summary task. Then what I did is I broke it down into a series of sprints. And usually the idea of sprints are anywhere from 1, in some cases up to 4 weeks. We have customers that kind of range between the two. But inherently the idea is that we basically can have a short period of time to produce value, and we're going to track and plan and manage what we're working on. So let me continue with the database structure, which is really what I'm leading into, is if we think in terms of effort, in many cases, development teams or technical teams really struggle in terms of trying to figure out what is the level of effort or how many hours will something take. And if you think about something you've never done before and you have to kind of guesstimate, putting an hour on it seems a little risky. And certainly from a management perspective, everybody wants to hold some accountability. So technical teams or development teams sometimes struggle with that. So organizations, in fact, if you think in terms of sprint, they'll talk about something called story points. And whether you call it story points or you have other flavors or names for this, the idea is that we're looking at the level of complexity. And the complexity behind delivering a feature or a user story or a task or a deliverable is that we're trying to figure out how much time will that take. Usually that does have some correlation which it might tie back into hours. So I might see that there might be a one-for-one correlation early on between my hours, and then certainly I might have a variation between that. But overall, the idea is that a story point helps you to define the complexity. We have customers that we work with that, especially in the retail manufacturing, they actually go with shirt sizes. So they go, hey, this is a small, it's a medium, it's a large, it's an extra large. And so they'll quantify something where they can begin to look at how many points or what is the size. And as they begin planning and successfully rolling out one sprint to another, they can figure out how many story points they can actually accomplish, which might translate to hours or the number of resources, whether they're dedicated or non-dedicated, to a task. Continuing this discussion, if we think in terms of setting up a good sprint or an agile schedule here, is I like to track the state. So in many cases, if it's a 3-week or a 4-week sprint, you can have these ongoing activities, but establishing a field that says, is it done? Is it not started? Is it in progress? You know, where is that out? Is going to give us some very beneficial views as well as some business intelligence that we have in Project 2013 to help us really showcase the value of things that are done, not done, and then what did it take? What is that burn down that it took to deliver? Another key element here is I've added the sprint. Now again, we can see it in an outline structure that I have a sprint, but by adding a field here, which I'm going to talk about how to build these, where I can put in the actual sprint that a feature or a task or a milestone is being worked on, allows us another way to sort and group. Now the term backlog, for those of you that are not familiar with this, again, some of you may we talk about sprint backlogs and then the overall product backlog, but the idea is that the backlog is kind of the parking lot. It's something that's kind of out there. We haven't planned when we need to start it. I need to hold that in reserves, and if we've got some bandwidth, maybe we can go to the backlog and pull something off there, sweep that into a sprint to see what we're working on. And the idea is inherently I've got some fields that help me manage that. Now I've laid this down where I put the backlog down below here, and let me showcase another feature in a successful schedule that will help you in terms of the backlog. So remember, we might know who is going to do it. We may have assigned resources specifically to this, and so whether it's a generic resource or a person's name, we have people that we can assign to that. But one of the things that will make a good, successful backlog, if you're building an Agile or Sprint schedule, is when you take your tasks, notice I don't have these sitting at the beginning of my project schedule like most default tasks are. So if I double-click on a feature, which inherently is something that we are going to try and work or build, again, as I mentioned, sometimes they're called user stories, and I click on the Advanced tab, I'm setting the constraint type for these activities to what's called as late as possible, meaning that the hours, the effort, and the assignment of this is sitting at the very end of the project, and we're not looking at this being front-loaded, meaning that when you type a new task, it slips to the beginning of the schedule. These are on the backlog. It is not part of our sprints. It's not part of the iteration that we're going through. And so these tasks will simply slide to the end of wherever the phase is or that particular schedule that we have set up. When you do bring a task, for example, if we decide to grab feature 11 here, and I'm just literally going to drag and drop that right into Sprint 3, is I might want to create a predecessor-successor relationship. I may not have a predecessor-successor relationship. And so what I might do is say, look, I'm just working in this environment. I'm just using this as a manually scheduled activity. And I could drag and move this around wherever I need it to go. But inherently, the idea is that I'm simply managing work and features. And as I add that, I don't know if you saw that, but when I've added these fields, my user, basically we get into our story points. If we see if we can see it there. Yep. Added up because it's a numeric field, and so I'm looking at a roll-up of numbers specifically around that. So I can say, hey, look, we roughly can get about 20, maybe 30, between 20 and 30, no more than 30, basically story points in a sprint. Here's what we're going to try and do. We're going to grab feature 11, move it in. But if you have it that it is auto-scheduled, remember this task is going to move to the end of either the phase or basically the outline summary activity. You'll need to come back in here and just change that either to as soon as possible or establish your dependencies. But a lot of times people will put a backlog, and then what they'll see in terms of moving those objects around is that as they bring the task to bear, they'll find that a lot of these are sitting at the early part of the schedule, which skews the hours or work that's remaining to be done. So with this in mind, I'd like to just kind of go into a little bit about our overall project, meaning that we've got a good view, we've got some pieces that we've built here, and in terms of us setting up basically the idea of what we've built and assembled, let me show you how to build these fields together. So first of all, I'm just going to right-click on the customer need column header here, and I'm going to go into what's called custom fields. The value is that in Project Professional, or if you're using Project Pro for Office 365, which is kind of streaming, you didn't need to install it, and you pay a month-to-month subscription, is that you can pick a text field, you have number fields, but we can come in and create basically a named column that says, here's what it is, it's a customer name, and I don't want to type this in, I want to draw from a lookup. And so you can set your priorities, low, medium, high, come in here and put in extra high, or you can say it's small, medium, and large, or XX large. The idea is that I have a drop-down that I can leverage working as I put these together. So if I add this directly to this view, and either I set the default value, which is, hey, most everything comes in at medium priority, I can click on that, set as default, and then as I add new features or tasks, this will automatically fill in as I do that without having to manually type that in. These activities allow us to come in, and what's important here is to add this in terms of a drop-down. And let me zoom that so we can all see it. But inherently, we've got a great-looking view that allows us to standardize the metrics that we pull inside of here. For those of you that are going to be working with Project Online or Project Server, I'll talk about this a little bit more, but having a lookup table allows your data to roll into your OLAP cubes. Or if you're going to talk about creating, a good business intelligence, we want to make sure we share this information in as many places as possible. Again, making sure those values are in place. Let me continue with the story points field. And again, this is a little bit easier, but it has a little bit of a nuance that a lot of people forget. So when I go into story points, you'll notice that I can create, flavors or numbers of those. I would rename it. But if I come in, I just chose a number field. I also told, and this is the important part, that for calculation to summary rows, I want it to use either a formula or to sum up the numbers. So remember, as we move tasks in or we change the numbers, we want that to roll up to a summary task, which is important. Now, I haven't checked this box here, but I'm going to talk about this briefly. And again, for my development team, they're always hounding the project schedulers and the senior portfolio advisors to say, hey, look, if you're going to build a field and you want to make sure those values show up in assignment views, meaning, for example, if there are 10 story points, or if it's a low priority or a medium priority, and I want to make that available, what we want to do is say for assignment rows, when I go to an assignment view, if you want the data that's out at a task level to show up, you need to click this box. And for those of you that are veterans out there in project, I think this is helpful for you to understand that if you don't check that, a lot of times as we go into assignment views like the resource usage or task usage, you're going to find a lot of options that just will not show up, allowing you to sort, group, or filter. So putting those values in place are going to be helpful for you to work from. Okay. Without too much further ado, let me continue here. Again, we talked about sprint and state. In many cases, people, well, I like to use number fields for numbers, but does it really matter? Well, it will matter if you want to mix and match your text. So the idea is if I'm creating a lookup and I'm going to have a text value, just understand that your numeric sort in your drop-down, you may want to prioritize that order, meaning that when I drop it in here, I want to display the lookup table. And with that lookup table, I can do it by row number. So at least the idea is that it's giving me a natural sort. Again, we can still see from a text or a number perspective some of the views and options that we have. State, again, another text field that we can go in and manage. And what I like about working in Project Professional, and certainly if you talk about working in Enterprise, is that if you haven't spent a lot of time either in PPM Online, basically Project Server's online version, or if you're working in Project Server and you have administrative rights, a lot of you may not have seen is that if I can build it locally, I have the opportunity to promote this directly into the enterprise, including establishing lookup tables. I'll talk about this a little bit more because my preference in a server environment, or basically online environment, is that I like to kind of define that a little bit more, make sure I have a good structure in place. But you're not ever stuck if you're not a Project Online user and you haven't really figured out the administrative side for you not to be able to create custom fields and migrate those forward. The reason I'm showcasing these pieces, and this is important, is that it's the layout of your features. It is the layout of how you organize an Agile iteration. And the idea is that I can expand and collapse a sprint or a 1 and 2. I can basically view that information. And even if I'm working in a waterfall schedule but I have an iteration, I have this opportunity to be able to swap and view a basically set of columns that are helpful for me in working. In a minute, I'm going to hop into an integrated schedule. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but inherently the idea is that I'm laying out data. So we hear many times that people say project is not an Agile tool. It is not a Scrum planning tool. And in many cases, I hear people say it is a waterfall tool. Project is great for waterfall type schedules. I'm here to tell you that project is neither waterfall nor is it Agile. It's a relational database. And if you think in terms of the columns that you want to sort, group, or filter by, you can actually go in and say, well, listen, I need to quickly flag all of the high priority tasks and see where those are at. And now I'm using this database to help me sort, group, and find that information. In fact, if I take that to the next level, let me go over to my View tab here. And let me hit the drop-down for groups, and I've created something called a burn-down group. And the idea is that I can say, let's group by what's done, what are the features, what are the sprints that we're working in, and what are the hours, or what are the story points, or if I really wanted to, I could track even the cost. Let me just insert a cost field here. So depending on what you're putting together, it's not about the methodology of how you lay it out, whether it's phases, or it is an iteration of sprints, or highly interactive process reviews. And sometimes engineering companies, we talk about a 30% design, a 60% design, and a 90% design. What we look for is the ability to see these roll-ups, to say, how do we do? What's done? What was the cost? If you snapped a baseline, we can expand that as well and say, here's our planned and actuals as we're learning. And we can look in terms of even budget or baseline for story points, cost, work, etc. All I'm doing is using project's native built-in features to lay out groups, or if I want to simply summarize by sprint, I'm changing my view, applying a little bit of grouping where I can showcase and validate this information for us to work from. Okay, so with this kind of a high-level description, I'm going to be moving into a little bit more detail. But what I'd like to do is maybe pause and open this up for questions. So I know that Cindy's probably been answering questions for folks. So let me take a look at a few here. Maybe I can verbally online kind of post a few of these. All right. Let's see, we talk about having a PDF. Yep, we will definitely have slides available for folks. We have more certainly to come through. This is a recorded presentation, so you definitely will be able to have access to that as well. Let's see. For those of you who are asking again, who maybe showed up a little bit late, if you'd actually like to get a copy of my Microsoft Project 2013 file, I'm happy to share that. Just send me an email, and I have my contact information here as well. Definitely want to get you guys started taking advantage of this. Okay, let me pause for questions. Let's see if we have any more questions that we can bring up here and I can answer. Kelly posted a question basically asking, can tasks be synchronized with Team Foundation Server? Now, you may not be aware of this, but at the project conference that's coming up, I will be actually presenting on Project 2013 and Team Foundation Server. So the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, we talk about the level of detail we really define, which is, if we're tracking sprints, in some organizations, in fact, let me just bring up a view here. I might be able to showcase this a little bit differently. I was going to look for just a standard Agile. Here we go. Let me bring up this file real quickly. It's another type of Agile where the features themselves are milestones. Really, we're tracking, is it done, is it not done? But the sprints themselves are the tasks. And in many cases, in Team Foundation Server, which is basically a product of Visual Studio, is that people are checking in and out their code, the dev teams are working, but what they can do is roll up those activities by connecting to project and say, don't put the details in project, just roll them up against sprint 1 or sprint 2. And then we can track key handoffs or deliverables as milestones. So this is another way of organizing and showcasing information specifically around TFS. That was a great question. So Michael posted a question which says, does this method permit earned value management? So if we think whether a task is a sprint or a task, whoops, let's just go right to the correct project. Here we go. Let's bring up my integrated one here. That'll probably be a little bit easier. So if I'm looking at a task and I'm baselining work and I'm assigning actual assignments in terms of hours, the fact that maybe I want to have story points or have other ways of grouping should have zero impact from an earned value management reporting, right? The idea is that I'm planning, I'm baselining, and then I'm tracking progress against actuals. And if we actually connect this either via TFS into Project Server, or we connect Project Server timesheeting or task updates, is that we should be able to see in real time some of that information for updates. Okay, other questions? Let me just kind of pause here for a minute. Mary asked, how is the duration of the sprint summary task calculated? From the feature, or is it fixed? Now that's a great point, and I'm going to basically show something that many of my other MVPs would probably cringe if they saw this, because we talk about good, better, and best practices. So let me go and showcase something real quickly here, and we'll talk about that. Normally a summary task is calculated based upon what? It's really a product of its sub-activities. So the idea is that if you have a 2-week sprint, then your task should be scheduled around a 2-week sprint. And normally that's not a problem, especially if you're dealing with manual scheduling. But the minute we start talking about hooking up a dynamic schedule where we have predecessors, successors, which sometimes you do have and sometimes you don't, depending on what the teams are working on. But if you look in my view here, this is an example where we took a 2-week sprint and we took the end of a project phase and linked it to the beginning of another phase. Now, why is this not a best practice normally in project? And the reason why is that if you have an outline schedule, The task that you see right here cannot move any sooner than when the summary task starts. And especially if you have a waterfall schedule where you can kind of crash the schedule, do lag time and lead time, we really run into a place, I feel like I'm John Madden here, where I've got 3 X's and we're going to run a circle around the left here and we'll make that work and we'll get it into the end zone. But the idea is that tasks themselves, as we're working, cannot move any sooner than that summary task. Well, in a sprint process, we are time-boxed, and this is really an important concept, is that executives like to see things in a waterfall fashion. Phase 1, Phase 2, what are we getting done? Technical teams or development teams love the iterative process, but if we lose sight of the prize, we might have endless sprints. So by time boxing your time, basically your summary task, and tying them together allows you to ensure that we really, hey, we are not crashing that schedule. If you want something different, we will have to move it out of one phase into the next, and then we'll reallocate those story points as we need to, or the assignments. Great question. Let me scan for a couple more. I know we could be here for at least 3 days talking about all kinds of flavors and variations. Aaron says, will resources allocated to the Agile project show correctly on the waterfall projects? And the answer is yes. In fact, I'm going to be leading into that in just a minute. So why don't I just bring up my Agile project, and I'm going to be talking about this in a minute in terms of blending the two together. Let's see here. Kelly again, or a different Kelly. What is the difference between state versus status? Talking about the standard column. Not quite sure, but really the idea of the state field is it done? Status could be the same thing. I've just created a custom field. You can call it what you'd like, but in many cases you don't get credit for a deliverable or a feature or a user story until it's completely done. And so in many cases, as we look at crewing value or billing hours, you can use these fields to sort, group, etc. Okay. Well, let me continue. So I want to make sure we're able to take a peek at some of the elements that are there, and then I definitely want to have time to get into Project Online, because a lot of people say, wow, I can do Project Pro, I can make this spin on a dime, but how does it work with an online or a portfolio environment? So what you're showing right now, or at least what I'm showing right now on my screen, is what I consider kind of a standard waterfall phased approach. And I'll do a little zooming here so you can see it. So we start out with a concept approval phase. I might be doing a new database dual discussion, might be going out and securing hardware. Notice here I've got something called development sprints, which I'll come back to. You could certainly even have, a Prince2 or a PMI lifecycle phased approach of what we're working on with milestones, deliverables. In fact, if you look out here, you can even see some of my deadlines. Got a few deadlines out here for us to look at. So I'm tracking activities. You can also see that I've got assignments for local resources on the team. And I've also included kind of a little bit of a dashboard. So I've got some dashboard columns here, and I'll kind of explain how those work. But inherently, the idea is that as I'm working my schedule, if something takes longer and I increase the duration, or if the team comes back, I change it. I can see a ripple effect through my project, and I continue along my merry way until I change the values and I increase it beyond a time-phased view. So for example, if I'm looking from a scheduling perspective, and let me just grab a quick example of this, where, let's just grab plenty of good funds here. Let's grab portfolio. We'll just grab an example dashboard. Which version are we in? Okay. Okay, let's let this one load here. So whether I'm tracking a series of customer deliverables and activities, I'm grouping it by, key concept or values, is that the tasks themselves, which we refer to as our demand, is something that we're able to work from. So how we group and present that information will be important. Now, if I go back to project, and I talk about development, is that if I open up this development sprint schedule section, is that perhaps what I'm looking at is helpful, but if I'm looking at work and schedule and slippage and I would like to see red, yellow, and green indicators as things change, you certainly can treat that as you would any normal waterfall schedule. However, if I'm working through the value of presenting that information, perhaps I might just want to have what we call an Agile view. So I'm going to come up here to the upper left-hand corner, and I'm going to right-click. And you notice I've got one called Dashboard. This is simply a table. And I'm going to click on my Agile View. And so if I'm looking at a series of phased or phase activities, and I'm looking at resource assignments, I can certainly see on the features that I've got this little red stick figure, and I affectionately call him Raj for red over-allocated guy or gal. And in 2013, if you click on this and you go to your Task tab, you can call for the Task Inspector to come in and say, hey, what's going on here? Which resources are over-allocated? I see that it's my developer. Well, they're pretty busy. What are the tasks that feed into this? And then I'm able to move into a view, whether it is a sprint activity or a regular task, and I can certainly manage some of this in a team planner view. So inherently, if I'm working at assignments, work, and activities, I can quickly see and spot where resource assignments are under over allocated. In fact, if I'm connected to Project Online, I can also see tasks that are coming from other projects because you're in an enterprise environment. But the whole approach, in some cases, if whether we're using full manual scheduling or a series of auto schedules, that I'm moving the assignments around. So if I need to allocate some assignment activities, say, look, let's drop this off on Ty. Our developer is still on other commitments, you can see here from Project Server, and I need to move work around, I have a little bit more of a touch mode environment to manage over and under allocation. So the question that was asked, which is even if I'm using kind of a sprint view or a waterfall view, is I'm always in a position within project to say, look, demand is demand. A task is a task, and the level of detail that I want to track and put in there really means I'm capturing what's being done or delivered, and I'm also listing whether it's work, hours, or if it has a roll-up. Very helpful for us to work from. So again, back to this waterfall schedule, and let me just grab the split bar, is that I know a lot of organizations that have a mix where they're working in a series of phases, and then they have kind of a series of iterations. There is no reason you can't come in and certainly filter out by sprints, or you can come in and say, look, I want to find everything that has 0 story points, right? And it means I don't want to see any of my milestone tasks, or excuse me, my deliverable feature tasks. I might just want to see milestones, and everything else that is a regular task, which doesn't have a story point, is simply out there. Use your database to your advantage. And so the idea is that you can sort, group, and build views, including tables, to showcase key activities without having to go in and actually manually type it or insert your column. So if you're a project user and you go out and say, okay, I got a print, so I better insert this column and then rearrange the order, don't ever do that again. In your View tab, you're able to come in and inherently build a table. And I encourage people to have the views or tables that allow you to mix and match just with a right-click, present the value that you're looking for, go back into your dashboard view to manage and track your details, etc. The whole idea is that we are still working in a scheduling tool, regardless of whether it is an Agile, Scrum, or a waterfall PMI lifecycle or Prince2 lifecycle. Okay. With that in mind, just kind of breaking down some of our elements here, let's take a look at moving this into a server online environment. So the idea is that we're able to see tables, we're able to see custom fields, we're able to build a group, and sometimes people ask me, how hard is it to do a burn down? Well, let's go to an Agile view with my burn down, and now I can see here's all the no-value tasks, and break that down for me. Well, in 2013, they make it very simple, is that you can come in, you can always create a group, clone a group, or you can basically go into more groups, and what I'm going to do is just zoom in on this for you guys, but I'm going to go ahead and edit. And grouping is nothing more than us looking to our database to define, I want to group the order and the second or follow-up groupings of any fields that I'm looking for. Fun part about that is you can certainly group just the assignments. You can drop, we talk about an assignment view, you can look at just those. If you had that roll-down field where you said basically when you created a custom field that it moved down to the assignment level, you're still able to create grouping views by using this checkbox if you've done that in creating your custom field. And of course, if you're grouping in intervals, if it's a number or a date or it's characters, you can always kind of group. You have a lot of flexibility here Even if you don't want to show summary tasks, sometimes that's helpful in maintaining or not maintaining that. But the idea is that we can build a sprint view, which, let me apply it, break it down. Here I am in a waterfall schedule. Quickly show me my sprints. What have we got done? Let's go ahead and take a look at the customer need field here. I'm really hoping that we're going to show our high priority. And what's the number of hours, work, cost, or dollars? Again, notice my roll-up summaries are telling me in the grouping view what I have to manage. Again, very helpful in terms of quickly using a database to manage your view. Again, sprint view, more groups, go right into this. And this one's a simple one. I gave it a name, and of course, I'm a little lazy, so I put a little underscore at the top here. So it will always float to the top. You may choose not to do that if you're in an enterprise environment. And don't forget to show it in the menu so that it will appear as part of your drop-down. But again, color, cell shading, you can have a lot of fun with this in terms of managing. But there's no reason you can't mix or match a schedule. And again, you can always come back, clear your grouping, go right back into a mixed waterfall / Agile Scrum environment. All right, with that said, we're going to take a gander into basically Project Server. But let me hop into our next slide here. So we paused for questions. I'll take a few more. Let me stop sharing. And let me jump into our next slide. All right. Any final questions before I leave Project Professional or Project Pro for Office 365? Again, same feature benefits, whether you're pulling it from the cloud or locally. It's really about that setup and structure. Let me take a quick review here and see if we've got some that will be helpful for people. The question came up is from one of our participants. I need to display SharePoint list data in Project Server 2013 in a project detail page. So part of this is, again, this is not quite the question that I would answer, but I would say that if you're looking to display list information, the list information can be done several different ways. But the idea in Project Server, if you're creating a project detail page, you certainly can bring in tasks, you can bring metadata information, but there's also things that you can do displaying it, because a SharePoint list is in a SharePoint page. A project detail page is also a SharePoint page. So the secret to that answer certainly would be something that we would run in terms of syncing one SharePoint page to another and then associating it to a project. A couple folks mentioned they're new to Project Server. That's good. We're going to take a look at that as well. And some people asked for the email address, so please don't put me on a spam list. But I will be willing to help share some of these files out with you folks at the end. Stephanie asked, we plan a high level of epics, which are broken into user stories and executed across multiple sprints. We would like to show the epic to a user story or feature hierarchy in addition to execution across sprints. How would you recommend us doing this in Microsoft Project? So the idea, think of it like portfolio management, is if I create, in fact, let me just, why don't I just bring up Project Server right now so we can take a peek at this. I'll share my screen in just a minute, but if we think in terms of structuring tasks like they're their individual projects, if you had a field called an epic, right, the idea is that if I want to talk about a user story and maybe I have a name or a naming convention of that, is that I would add another custom column that just says, hey, for this particular epic, these are all the activities, sprints, and phases that fall into that. And the same way that we group by customer need or customer priority or status or state allows us simply to do the same type of grouping at a task, or if you have broken these up into independent files, we still can group enterprise view or what we call a master project if you're not in Project Online. Let me take a quick look at a few more questions here. Wow, they're streaming in, validating the email. That's good. Whoops. Bjorn asked, Tim, how do I add detail to the PBI during the backlog, grooming my developers to start to add tasks to PBIs? How would you capture that? Well, one of the things is really control over what we call team assignments. So this feature, not necessarily in Project Professional, but the idea is that if I'm going to build a basically a backlog of activities, and I want to have my development team basically go and grab those because they have an opening or we have a conversation of that. In Project Online, you actually can do something called Team Assign, and what you can do is allow the team to pull that in. Also, if you're using the timesheet or the My Task View, you can always add tasks in even if they aren't necessarily something you've been scheduled to. So you have the flexibility to allow your team via an online environment to see that. Okay, I'm getting the note that we've got about 35 minutes. I want to make sure we get into Project Server, and then I will continue to take questions. So kind of moving forward is let's go in to look at Project Online along with basically our Scrum Agile approach. So let me bring up my share screen here, and I'm going to start sharing. And looks like my login needs to come up. Hold on, give me a second here. And here we go. You can see all my email. Let me grab an online tenant for us to work with. So this will be helpful for us to work with. Okay. Bring up our portal screen. Let me actually tear this off where we can see that kind of in its own view. Great. Okay, so I'm going to go directly into Office 365. Let me make sure I actually have the right tenant login. Sometimes I get that wrong because I have lots of environments that I get to work with. And everybody watch my password. Nothing secret signing in here. Here we go. Try that again if I type it correctly. All right. So what I'm doing now is moving into what's called an online tenant. And the beautiful thing about Office 365 or Project Online is that you have a mixture of both SharePoint and a project enterprise environment for us to work with. The idea is that if we are building schedules, there's no reason we can't actually build a schedule and publish it into one environment, meaning one common resource pool across all of our projects. So with Project Online, the idea of having interconnected project schedules, project sites, business intelligence, and even strategy for helping you rate and rank and select your projects always means that we're using a SharePoint environment for a web portal to access that. So what I've got here is just kind of a project environment, and again, if you notice here, I'm just basically grouping projects by owner. And I'm able to come in and take a look at who owns what. I can put red, yellow, green indicators. Again, the same way that we have our dashboards in Project Professional, we can build these up at an enterprise level. And as I'm going through here, let's take a look at the Agile project itself. So I'm actually going to click on this. I'm going to drill directly in there. What I like about being online, and certainly either in the cloud, private, or on-premise, is that I've moved to more of a SharePoint web portal where I've got a ribbon that helps me manage, track, and deliver what we're working on. So as I begin to load from an environment, I can actually present information. I can control what end users see. I can even change the state. So the same way that we go through sorting and grouping and viewing this information, we're never in a position where we can't do the same things that we did at Project at a filter, sorting, and grouping level. We're actually able to come back in here and use that as well. All right, let's let my screen load up, and we'll drop right into a project. What I did is I took kind of the Agile project that we saw in Project Professional. So let me bring that up real quickly. And I actually am going to close a couple of these down because I've got about 3 variations. But if we look at this project itself, if I want to open this up, is available for publishing, meaning that I've actually published it into Project Online, and I used it to manage. So I'm able to track, manage, and when I'm done, I don't just save it and put it on a hard drive. I'm actually able to save it and publish that directly into Project Server. So the idea is that an environment, in fact, let me just bring it up here, where I can track that. In fact, I've got mine checked out, so let me close and check it back in, and we'll continue. With the view in terms of our Agile environment here, let me just close that one, and I will save the changes. And I'm going to go ahead and just close this one in Project Online. Let me zoom this for you guys. Is that because I'm connected to server, I can discard the changes, keep it in. I'm going to check mine in. That way I've got access to that. So while Project Pro allowed me a lot of detail in terms of what I'm working on specifically, let's see, it says it's trying to access it right now. So let me stop it, and we'll refresh here. We had it up here just before our demo, so let me bring that up again. And while that's reloading, is that we're also in a position where we can actually, in fact, I'll bring open another tab here, is that from a project perspective, is that I can build those custom fields directly into my environment. So on the left-hand side, from an administrative perspective, is that we have a grouping of our portfolio of projects, and then certainly a review and approval process. But let's take a quick look at our server settings, and the same way that I was building and managing my direct details in project is, let's go to our enterprise custom fields and lookup tables. So when we mention that we have an opportunity to create custom objects or custom views, the idea is that my environment, and my screen should be refreshing here, is that I can come in and create a field, and then I can also tie that field to a lookup table. So in Project Online, the idea is that I can come in and create a drop-down choice. Let's just go into our customer need field real quickly here. Again, from a text field, I can establish a field that I can have other basically fields look to. But if you look right here, very simply, I tell it it's a text level field, I give it a name, and then I'm able to drop in and basically take a peek at, here are the custom drop-down values that I'm looking for, low, medium, high. Again, if it's a customer priority, I could be doing it in shirt sizes or different values. But once I have my lookup table, I'm able to go back in. In fact, I'll just leave this page since I'm not making any changes. And let me drill right back up to where the fields are. So if I come back up here to customer need, which is the field that I would create at a task level, I can point that to my lookup. So I'm able to create a lookup table and then basically define what is my default value. So similar to that process of us creating a local field in Project Server and using it there, we can do this from an enterprise perspective. And the value here is that once we make it an enterprise-wide, I don't have to basically clone that out to all the other files. I basically can share that based upon the project or the project type. Let's look at another one here. We'll go ahead and talk about the, we've got customer need. I thought maybe what we do is, let's talk about our story points just for a second here. It's a little bit different since it's not a lookup table and it's not a text field. It's being a number in terms of a number field. In creating your lookups or creating your custom fields in Project Online, the idea is I can create formulas. I can go through here and create calculations. I'm also in a position where I can manage it based upon departments, meaning that I can create fields, views, and associate them to a department, which means that maybe when the IT guys come in here or the dev team comes in, they never see what the waterfall people are looking at. Or the inverse is true as well. Maybe I don't need to see, if I'm part of just the waterfall team, I don't have to see our Scrum or our Agile views. Again, we talk about that roll up or roll down. So for summary rows, we want to make sure that we can basically sum up the value if it's a number. And again, remember we talk about assignment rows. I really encourage people to say, hey, look, if you want to go to an assignment view, roll down your text field so that you can continue to sort, filter, and group. Now, we're not creating graphical indicators, but this is exactly where you would. You could come in, create a test condition, and the idea is some of those red, yellow, and greens that you saw before, you can see a list of what you can choose from. So based upon the condition, you can certainly take the text out of the equation and use it as a visual to see if it's done, in progress, slipping, etc. All right, let me cancel out of our custom fields here. And then let's take a quick look inside of our Project Center, which, let's see if my schedule, now that it's checked back in, Microsoft, will you let me into your online tenant? So my screen is still loading here, lots of data. Good, we've got that checked out. And wow, hope everybody's not sending emails at the same time. Let's take a quick peek at our views. So in Project Online, so if I go into a project view or I go back into my server settings, is in many cases when you go to a web page, if you want to look at an individual project, Inherently, the idea is that we manage our views for what people see, and this is important. So if we've spent time creating custom Agile fields in Project Online, what we can do is come in here and create different types of views. The Project Center, kind of at the project level, we can look at just resources in the Resource Center. You can look at resource plans, your work, we talk about that team assignment, what type of columns that we show up. And at the project level, you'll notice here I have one called Agile. So let me drill into my Agile view here. And the idea is that when I go and look at a project schedule online through the web, is that I get to define the different columns that I get to work with. I get to add those from right to left. And it's important if I want to sort, group, or even filter these, is that I ensure that I've added my fields directly. Now, of course, filtering gives you a wider set of options in terms of not necessarily having to add a column to a view. But if you notice here, I can put story points. I can change the state, the sprint, and these are those custom fields that I've come in here. And if I've got a field that says state, I certainly can come in and put a custom label. Let me zoom this for everybody, because a lot of times people go nuts when they look at a view and the information is displayed and it has some complex underscore database name, and we really want to say, hey, look, what state is this? Or is it the status or customer need? So think about being sensitive to your audience in terms of what you're presenting and how you're showcasing that information. And the idea is that I can be able to manage or build a view. I can choose the grouping so that when I first come in, I'm able to sort and group the way that I want. And then down below, we can make it available to different groups who may or may not want to see this. So let me leave my page without any changes. And I'm hoping that it'll let me back into my Agile project. So let me click right on Agile and see if it'll let me filter my view, come together. So while that's loading in terms of project itself, let me just kind of pause, and I'm going to go and take a look at a list of questions. It should open and up in just a second. And while that's popping up there, let's see here. Features work in templates. Yes, absolutely. We definitely have the ability to establish templates. So if we don't have to create all these columns, you can create basically a table, a view, or put it into the Enterprise Global template so that you see that. So here we are directly inside of the same project, which was our Agile project. And just for today, in terms of time here, you notice up at the top, I've got a list of views. So if I'm looking at the task detail view, notice there's no grouping. I can see my projects. I can see certain columns. In fact, if I want to edit this online, I can actually make simple modifications to hours, date, task. I can even link or unlink activities. But remember that Agile view that we were talking about with those custom fields? Let me click on that and have it do a quick review here. So if I look at all of our tasks and I start collapsing all of the non-sprint activities, I can see right here in my view, here's the milestones, here's the states, sprint 1, sprint 2. I can certainly collapse and expand the ones that are started, not started, that's in progress, what's done, and I get the same grouping roll-up for hours, work, and cost, including my story points if that's something that you'd like to use. And again, here are the fields simply showcasing in an online view. So there's not a whole lot of difference. In fact, if you can figure out how to build this in Project Professional, there is no reason you can't put this into an enterprise view and make it much more of an agile iterative discussion. What's nice about PPM Online is that we have this wonderful ability to actually go up here and create a timeline directly in the SharePoint page itself. So the idea is that as I click on my objects, I'm actually in a position where I can come in, look at it, and I can change the view based upon what I'm working on. Or I can even promote items up into my timeline view. So if I decide to edit and check this out, let's just do it. Let me edit right in the browser, not in Project Pro. Let me bring this open. Watch the ribbon, and the ribbon is essentially going to enable itself, and it'll refresh my screen. And I noticed that create a new database tool looks great, but I sure can't read those dates. What dummy put that up there? Oh, this is Tim's project. Well, that turkey didn't make that white so I can read my dates. So if I'm looking at text or font or values, I'm in a position where I can come up, certainly format the appearance where I can or can't see or manage that. And then again, as I'm looking at, maybe I'm taking my sprints. I'm thinking, hey, this is a great idea, but the idea is that if I'm looking at something I want to put it up here, I can take summary tasks or regular tasks, or even if I want to get into a milestone, is I can come up here, add that to the timeline. There it is. I did this right online. Instead of people kind of geeking out about your project schedule, they can look at the timeline view. Inherently, what I like about this is whether I'm in a Scrum process or a little bit more Agile, is I have multiple levels of undo. I'm centralized in one SQL Server environment, which gives me a lot of good flexibility. And if I really want to, let's just look at this project SharePoint site, which is dedicated to the project. So I'm going to leave this. Actually, let's stay on the page and do best practice. Let me close. Don't want to leave it checked out. I'm going to, actually, I'll save my changes and I'll check it back in. But the idea is if I want to leave and go and take a look at my project site, while this is processing up here in the upper right-hand corner, saving and checking it back in, I can have my team going out and having discussions around the project, what's going on, what's happening in those type of views. And so if I go back into my project or my project SharePoint page, any one of these objects is that I always have the opportunity to have a conversation around that. So again, if you see a project, you look at it and go, wow, this is really looking like we need to have some deeper conversations, we can drill right into these projects, look at them, look at the sprint pieces, apply to view. And so inherently training your end users, building simpler views to manage that, and then of course the assignment level of information, meaning that when we go and assign resources to a feature or a sprint, or if it's part of an epic, make sure those custom fields are available. And if I need to go and take a look at a project or its project information, as I'm always sharing, showcasing that data. Here's an example of a SharePoint page. Basically dropped in. This is where most of the teams will come. They can work with their documents, deliverables, issues and risks, again, tied to that. And very easily on the left-hand side here, we've got our document library where we can look at Office, labs, anything that we're working from. Okay, so this is just a little bit of a taste of taking a look at the same type of functional approach from a project view, project online, or project professional. Again, empowerment for you to think about project not as a waterfall, not as a Prince2, not as a Scrum tool. It's a database, and how you want to group, sort, and present that information is always helpful to the end user based upon you creating that summary structure. All right, let me move on, and we're going to take a few more questions here before we wrap up. So moving to our next slide. Questions about Project Online. All right, now I do need to keep this in the bounding box because this is like talking about an ERP system. It is an enterprise project management system, so I want to make sure we're localizing our questions around Agile. So let me take a look here. Rose says, is there a file size limitation using web access to a SharePoint site? If you are on Project Online, there is a limit. I believe it is 20 to 40 gigabytes to a SharePoint site. But I also encourage people that if you are building custom Microsoft project files, for example, if you have a large schedule that has maybe 10,000 rows, you do need to think about the number of custom columns, because in terms of file size, what happens is if you're creating lots of grouping, it's the number of columns times the number of rows that does that multiplication of size. So if you have 10,000 rows and you add 100 custom columns, you're doing a lot of database storage of information. So think about that, certainly in the size and complexity. In many cases, I will tell people, say, look, if you're tracking information, you can actually, in your business intelligence views, do a calculated field where you never stored the data, but you actually create a view that sorts and groups based upon maybe appending those together. Think of like Excel, where you can concatenate two cells together by simply typing equals cell 1 and ampersand, and then a little bit of quotes to kind of separate the two together. All right, let's take a look at a few more questions here around Agile, Scrum, and Microsoft projects. I see Kim. Hi, Kim. Great to hear you again. And Dare says the features work in the TFS template as targeted date, but your presentation shows a start date and end date. Where did they come from? So the start date and end date of a project really is based upon when the start of the first task is to the end of the last task. And if we think about TFS, is that the activity itself, you could actually create those and push those from Team Foundation Server, kind of a development Agile environment, into project, or you can push them from project down into TFS and then begin consuming sub-activities under that. The start and end dates usually default by where we schedule the task itself. Debbie asks, is SharePoint part of the Project 365 offering, or are you using your own SharePoint site from the project subscription? So the answer to that is I am completely demoing today from the cloud. Basically what I have is a Project Online subscription, and I have Project Professional on, mine is actually a local installation of Project Pro, but it won't matter between Project Pro for Office 365, as if they couldn't put enough words into that. But the idea is that Project Professional you can buy in the cloud and have it streamed to up to 5 mobile devices. But when you publish, you can certainly use Project Pro. And the question itself back to is SharePoint available is absolutely. So when you get Project Online, you get a SharePoint site set up kind of like for Office 365. I believe the key thing is if your organization already has an online tenant, I encourage you to sign up. We're happy, in fact, I'm happy to, with our team, to answer any questions about getting online in the cloud. But I encourage people to stay inside of their corporate tenant versus, maybe setting up a short temporary site that you build out and then later have to migrate. But you've got some options. Great value. We're in Project Online. You get SharePoint as well. It's all part of that subscription. And if you go to www.microsoft.com/project, there's a lot of information about how to do that, how to sign up, what the discounts are from an online perspective, and you'll also see AdvisorCon there as a partner if you have any questions. Bjorn, I'd love to show you TFS integration, but unfortunately we won't have time for that today. Please come see me at the project conference. We'll be demonstrating this directly there. Again, we have like an hour and a half just around that piece because it is pretty exciting. All right, other questions? Okay, a few more around, yep, I'm going to share the PDUs as well. Some people came a little bit late, so that's great. Jeanette says, what you demoed will not be available if we use SharePoint Enterprise in Microsoft Project Pro 2013? And the answer is everything that I've shown you is 100% available. So I use Project Pro Client, I use Project Online, and whether Project Online or Project is on-premise or it's private cloud, I think if you talk about good hosting partners, there's plenty of them out there. BMO is one that comes right to the top of my mind. But the idea is that if you get in there, all of this that we're describing is available. And I just purposely demonstrated the cloud because a lot of people don't know that, hey, it works as if it's on-premise. There are a few restrictions in terms of you can't get to the back end of your data. But you know what? If you want to do workflow, if you'd like to do data-driven diagrams, if you want to use Visio services, a lot of that in the cloud is all going to be still accessible. And a question came up just recently about Project Online reports, and I'm going to showcase a couple here. I know this is a little off topic, but let me bring this up. So working with the project team, you'll be able to see things in more of an Excel-like reporting from a business intelligence perspective in your online environment. So literally you can treat it like Excel, build charts and graphs. And what I like about Project 2013, again, this is basically an Excel services view that we're viewing, but if I go back into Project, and let me just grab a file for us to take a quick look at. New in 2013, and this is really sexy, is that we actually have built-in reports directly inside a project. So the same way that you have Excel's charting and graphing engine, it sits directly here. So again, we talk about adding those custom fields for Sprint and Agile. You can sort, group, and you have access to your pivot table information directly here so that you're in a position where you don't even necessarily have to leave project. You can take a look at charts, graphs, you can change the view, you can apply a filter, turn on that information. Didn't like that chart, let's go to a pie chart. There you go. Double click. And for those of you who've done Excel charting and graphing, you've got the same functionality. It's all now native in Project. Don't have to send it anywhere. You can drop this into a PDF, showcase and share that with folks. Okay, let me pick on a couple of questions and then we'll get to the wrap up here. Bjorn asked, how do we handle portfolio management with Agile practices in Project Server? So if we talk about new work portfolio management, meaning that we're looking at the selection of new projects, the ability for us to go in and apply portfolio analysis is how to select the work. And if you don't know, you don't have your features, you haven't broken out your user stories, and you're looking at basically a portfolio view of selecting a project, in many cases what you can do is build something called a resource plan that says, I need 3 developers for 3 months, 1 PM, 2 testers, and a QA person. And you're able to go in and basically create that demand artificially until your project is reviewed and approved. So the overall idea is that we're in a position where we can rank our projects by priority, by strategic significance against a business driver, but we're also in a position where we can also select that demand without having to build out all the user stories. That's a great question. Okay, let me take a couple more here. Can you share your screen? Let me go back to a screen share. I was going to try and get this to load for you. We've got a lot of stuff going on with the demo here, plus we're also recording. I'll tell you what, there's some screenshots. I actually have some canned slides I can send folks real quickly. Let me share the screen of our portfolio view for you guys. Here we go. Allow. And then ask me for my credit card number, my social security number, and my daughter's date of birth. Here we go. So what's loading up now on my screen, which you guys should see here in just a minute, is the ability to come in and Project Server has out of the box the ability to kind of do portfolio selection and ranking. I hope it's loading because I just closed it and now I reopened it from our views. But let's see here. If that takes longer to load, let me pivot to another question. Here we go. Oh, there we go. It's right here. So the idea is that I can come in, I can take a look at a list of portfolio scenarios, and I can rate and rank these projects as an intake process, defining, do we have enough budget to do this? What are our limitations? What are the values that we're able to work with? And then every project that we're kind of proposing can be rated or ranked against a business driver. In this case, I'm not going to have time to go into the resource piece here, and I probably could spend another hour and a half that, but if you have 100% of proposed projects, you've got a resource plan against them that would represent kind of your iterative life cycle. And let's say that our budget is only $100,000. I can tell this to recalculate, and what it's going to do is look at the strategic ranking of my projects. Apparently I don't have enough budget to do any work, so let's say 900. 1, 2, 3. I guess an extra 0 does matter, and people do complain when their paycheck is short by an extra 0. So let's see what our budget is for our project. But again, from a portfolio, we can move projects in, we can move them out, we can actually come in and define whether we want to force a project in or out. Again, this is all native in Project Online or Project Server. The idea is that you've got that. Setting up a Scrum or Agile process may not have all the details in the early portfolio selection stage. Okay. Well, tell you what, let me conclude. I know a lot of folks getting to the top of the hour here definitely want to see this. So let me bring up a quick short summary for everyone here. So I encourage people to think in terms of an Agile approach. Scrum, waterfall won't matter. The key is that project isn't necessarily just waterfall or it's Agile. It's a database. Set up your custom fields to sort, group, present that information. There are certainly strategies on the level of details, how we break out our user stories. We had some great questions about, how do we deal with epics? How do we deal with more of a portfolio approach to sprints? And again, I treat it the same way I would build out Project Online as an enterprise tool or a single project, as I want to look at a column that allows me to sort, filter, and group that information, and I create a lookup table to do that. So the key is how you lay that out and presenting some of those key fields.